As a non-Christian, a non-believer, why do I care how Christians define their God? Why should I be interested in this book that you've written?
That's a really honest question. And I think it matters to anybody, whether they're believers or not, what Christians think about God, because Christians are like 70% of the country. And a very small fraction of that group are using Christianity to advocate a fairly reactionary right-wing agenda that has tremendous cultural and political importance. So it matters. It matters how that influence is being used. The cultural symbolism of Christianity is immensely powerful politically, and it seems to me the political influence of Christianity, the theology of Christianity, can be understood in two really very different ways. On the one hand, there's the God of command and control, that it seems to me that God is human control needs inflated to a cosmic level and projected upon God and then worshipped. And if that's who God is, it leads us in one direction. But there's another theory of God, another core theology that Christians have, which is God is compassion. God is loving kindness. God is supportive presence. And if that's the God of Christianity, then that leads Christians to behave in a very different way. So which God are we talking about? Is which Christianity are we talking about? Which is which political pressure on American culture? I think that really matters. Clout counts for something.
So why bother with contending with Christianity? In a sense, isn't this just like kind of beating your head up against the wall if there are already creeds and doctrines and dogmas that have laid down the law about who God is? How can you even question who God is at this point?
Easy. Watch me. Watch me. Christians have argued about who God is from the very beginning of the tradition, even back into Jewish scripture. There's enormous arguments about who God is. Look, the institutional churches, organized religion, orbits around its own creeds and dogmas and doctrines. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church is 754 pages, very tiny type. Every denomination out there has a big, hefty book like that. Sure, institutions orbit around creeds and dogmas and doctrines. But Christianity itself, as a religion, Christianity is centered on the human encounter with the sacred. Christianity orbits around human spirituality, around a certain set of elusive but incredibly important human experiences. And so, of course, century by century, era by era, philosophically and theologically, that conversation changes. And we're all part of that conversation.
To back up a moment, though, we're talking about God. How do we even take seriously the idea that God exists in the first place?
The orbiting teapot argument?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Is God in orbit? Believing in God is like believing there's a teapot in orbit around the sun between Earth and Mars.
No offense, but yes.
Well, if I wasn't interested in having these conversations, I wouldn't have written the book. That's just crucial. Once again, that's a crucial question. What do you mean by God? Do you picture a superhero leaning over a balcony, looking down at all of us? Or do you picture God as the engineer almighty, sitting at a keyboard, all these monitors arrayed in front of him, command, control, smite? Is that what you mean by God? I don't believe in that God. I think that is the orbiting teapot God. But there's another way of thinking and talking about God, which is God is the language some people in some traditions use to talk about inward experiences they have that they can't explain in any other way, or that this is the explanation they grew up having for those experiences. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, please do.
You know, some things are so much more easily explained by telling a story. A friend of mine was riding the Red Line from suburban Evanston into downtown Chicago, and the year before they'd gotten air-conditioned subway cars for the first time, and everyone was very excited. But the windows didn't open, and the air conditioning units did not survive the first encounter with the Chicago winter. So the next summer was quite warm for people like riding in a tin can with a bunch of sweaty strangers. So he's on this subway car, and it's this unbearably hot. And at one point, the subway trains go down a curve and underground and finally out of the sun, but it was very, very noisy, screaming metal. And as the train sort of dives underground and there's this unbearable screeching, he looks around at all the people, and they're radiating not misery but beauty. And he sees them as incredibly precious and wonderful and as deeply and profoundly loved. And he too is enveloped in this unbelievable love and value and beauty and significance instead of hot and sweaty and itchy. And he's just blown away. It's incredibly real experience. And then, you know, before they get to the Clark and Division stop, it's all faded out. And he's like, what was that? What do I do with that? So he's telling me this, and because he really doesn't know what to make of that experience. Well, you can write it off. You can blame it on the weather. You can say it's brain endorphins. You can say it was a revelation of Buddha nature. You can do anything you want with it. He was a Christian. He wanted to call it God, but this was not the God of creeds and doctrines and dogmas and who's going to hell and who's not. And he was like, what do I do with this? That's the question. What if we take those seriously? What would it mean to look at all the people in the city and say, wow, all these people are incredibly precious at some transcendent level? Now, that's an important experience for a religion to focus on and encourage and take seriously for people.